Welcome to what is now episode 3 of Engineering How. So this is all still new and very fresh, and we launched this as a webinar series to fill the gap for people that aren't getting kind of the learning and development opportunities, whether they're on a break from work or work is quiet at the moment, and also a chance for us to continue the podcast series that we launched, which is on hold at the moment until we can film it again. So this is episode 3. This one's going to be focused on startups, launching a startup, and really giving kind of an insight from 2 different perspectives of what it's like starting and launching a business and how you do that. I'll introduce Robert in a second, who's joining us. Just so a bit of kind of information for everyone, there's a chat box which will be on your right-hand side, or will be, if you're on mobile, a little kind of message box in the bottom corner. By all means, feel free to use that. We'd love to have your questions as well, so it's not just us two wittering on. So if you've got anything you specifically want to know, please pop it in the chat. We won't necessarily answer it straight away, but I promise you we will get to answering it. And there will be a poll that we'll put up shortly, and a couple other polls. So again, by all means, jump in and answer them. To answer the first question that's just popped up, how long will this be? Probably around 45 minutes, certainly no more than an hour, but we'll see where the conversation goes. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Robert to introduce himself in a second, but just to give you a bit of background, Robert has founded and launched a company called Additive Automations, who are a fairly recent startup that received some funding, so he'll be able to give us a real good insight into how to do it and how he found it. So Robert, I'll pass over to you and let you probably do a better job of telling everyone what you do and what Additive Automations is about.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Great to see quite a lot of people on, and hopefully I can add some value to their day. So I co-founded Additive Automations with Phil Kitchen back in 2018. But it's really took off since we got funding late last year. And I'm the CEO, Phil's the CTO, and we are automating, or we are creating human-centered robotic systems to facilitate the future of manufacturing, but we're applying that at the moment to automating metal additive manufacturing. My background is Imperial College. That's where I studied mechanical engineering. And then I also did a master's in robotics engineering at Bristol. And we're currently based in Sheffield, near the Advanced Manufacturing Park, which, if anybody knows manufacturing in the UK, that's where Rolls-Royce have their base, and McLaren, and Boeing as well. And yeah, my experience in engineering is very much in additive manufacturing, and Phil's, my co-founder, is very much in collaborative robotics. My degree was kind of a blend of engineering and business, and I have worked in management consulting a number of years ago, and so I do have a bit of kind of finance knowledge, although I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means.
Okay, perfect. And I think just in case people want more of a background, I was fortunate enough before lockdown came in to do a podcast with Robert and with Phil on site. So if you want to learn, I guess, a bit more about the company and their journey and the podcast all around people's backgrounds in engineering, it was one of my favorites so far. So I'll send a link out to anyone that's joined us today or is watching us on demand, so you can go and listen to that. But today we'll focus more around the actual ins and outs of launching that business. So I'm just going to share a poll now with everyone, which would be great for us to get your answers to, as to where you're at in your startup journey. So have you launched a business? Are you looking to launch a business? Or do you know what, you've got no plans, but you're just interested in what it's like? The answers are anonymous, so people will be able to see what the results are, but not who's voted what. So you don't have to worry about anyone finding out your plans. So we'll try and tailor this to all 3 avenues, people that have launched a business, so hopefully can listen to the advice and probably have faced some similar journeys. And certainly for those people looking to launch the business, we can give you an insight into what that's going to be like. So let's start right from the beginning, Robert. First things first, your idea to launch the business, take us back and give us, and I'll share my insight as well into how the idea came about and how you start. There'll be a lot of people that are where you were right at the beginning thinking, I've got an idea. How did you progress that into becoming a business?
Yeah, I was working at 3T Additive Manufacturing, which is the UK's #1 service bureau for metal and plastic 3D printing or additive. And I was the first production engineer at the company, and it's quite a challenging role because we were transitioning from a prototyping mentality to a production one. And my job really was to improve traceability, reliability, quality, as well as ensure safety and process control. And part of that was to automate what happened before printing and after printing. And I hit a brick wall where I couldn't really improve things anymore. And I saw why, because it was a manual task and there was no off-the-shelf solution to automate those tasks. And I was very much at the problem, feeling the problem day in, day out, and with the users. And that's when the idea came into my head. That's when I started researching, okay, is someone else doing anything like this? Are other universities doing anything like this? Are there research projects out there, Innovate UK projects and the equivalent in other countries? And then I started talking to people as well, people in the industry, and getting their opinion, but also people outside of the industry as well. And I got to a point really where the idea was valid. There was a need to solve the problem. And it was just a question of doing it, just getting on and doing it.
So for you then, that first, I guess we try and break this down, that first part of starting that business is almost validating your idea. Because we've all been there and probably all had some weird and wonderful ideas for businesses, but most tend to start a business either because they think the current business they're in could be better, and they go and try and launch a better version of that business where they've got the autonomy, or they go down the other route, which you've sort of done, which is I've got an idea, no one's doing it at the moment, so I'm going to go and do it. So would you say that that's what I found for me was that first stage was validation, have your idea, research it, and get some opinions as well from other people in the industry, or do you know what, sometimes just your close family that will tell you if you're being stupid or if it isn't going to work. Was that kind of the first stage for you?
Absolutely. It was validation, 100%. And it wasn't too complicated validation. Later on, we'll get into some more complicated ways of validating the business, but this was just validating the idea at its crudest. Is the problem, does other people have the problem? And is there going to be a market for that problem in the future? Are people going to pay to solve that problem? Are there any competitors? Is it being done? It was really that simple, nothing more complicated than that. And a kind of a bit of advice for anyone who wants to maybe learn from how I learned or how I wish I'd learned was to read this book called The Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. And I would definitely recommend reading that because it explains how to test an idea without putting a bias in somebody's head. If you're going to say to someone, this is my idea, what do you think? They're not really going to want to hurt your feelings, but you really want honest feedback. So the Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick kind of is quite a good framework for how you can ask someone's opinion about your idea without actually telling them it's your idea. And so therefore you get honest feedback and you really know where you stand, if it's an idea you should pursue or not.
So in terms of that, who did you do that with? Was that customers? Was it people in the industry? Who was your kind of test subject as such?
Well, first and foremost, it was the users at 3T. and it was the CEO at 3T and the CTO at 3T. That was first and foremost, and then from there, it was the COO and the CEO at 3T, and then from there, it was TCT, which is a trade show for additive manufacturing. I went to the trade show and just spoke to lots of different potential customers and users. I think it's over 10 or 15, and included startups and really large aerospace and automotive companies, and just went up to them and just chatted to them about their problems and what they were trying to fix. And then it also included just talking to like my family, like you said, and my wife, who has no idea about robotics and additive manufacturing, but just see if they can understand it, i.e. the MON test. And then also going and talking to like accelerators and incubators, people with business or skill of creating startups. And a lot of people were, fair few people were negative, and that's great because you take negative feedback and you see, why did they say that, and is there anything I can do to fix that, or does it mean that the idea is not going to work, or does it just mean that I need to tweak the idea? I think the overarching goal that you set at the beginning doesn't change, but the way you get there changes 10, 20, 30, 40 times. In the first 6 months, it changes a huge amount. So you have to be ready to accept change and to pivot and to be flexible and agile. But you shouldn't forget that overarching final goal.
One of the biggest things I learned for myself was don't try and define it too specifically. I think I've seen through my business and with your business and other startups that we work with, the idea, the overarching idea remains the same, but the actual specifics or the direction changes so many times in that first 6 to 12 months because you're constantly pivoting, be it from feedback, be it from constraints, be it staff or cash flow or availability of product, etc. So I think that would be my biggest bit of advice: is the details are important, and we'll come on to some of the numbers and the details that go into that. But I think in terms of the idea, if you know what the end goal, I think you are going to have to accept that journey to get there is going to be very different from what you imagine it on day one or even before day one. And I can say with some confidence that's definitely been the case for you guys, hasn't it?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. And has it been the same for you, Tom?
Yeah, I think with so just to set scene, I launched a engineering technology recruitment business back in July, having worked in the industry for ages, and I think recruitment is recruitment, and there's too many of us to start with, but that's a webinar for another day. But I think, yeah, certainly the goal of what we're doing, which is supplying staff within our specific sectors, is still the same. But I think how we've done it and the people we've used to do it and the systems and certain things we've invested in is stuff I never knew of 6 months ago. And I think even stuff like this, you're constantly adapting with new ways of working and new challenges that come across. And there was a webinar we did yesterday with a guy called John Mossop, who is a senior guy within oil and gas, and he did a talk around how you survive a downturn and ride an upturn. And his kind of one-line takeaway, which I really liked, was get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's something that's very, very true for startups, is you've got to be comfortable adapting, changing, being under a little bit of pressure. That's that for me is a key factor. From your side then, once you'd done the MUM test, once you'd kind of validated your idea, what did you do in terms of putting together, be it a business plan or a cash forecast? And I guess that's the next starting point for a lot of people, is how much is this going to cost? How much could I make? And how the hell am I going to pay for it?
Well, when I look back now at the first business plan I put in, I laugh at it. Like, you try to do the best at the very beginning, but you're at the beginning, and there's a lot of assumptions that you're making. It's very difficult to do that kind of cash flow forecasting, that business plan so early up front. And I think now, having learned what I've learned, I would go down a slightly different route than do a business plan and a cash flow forecast, what I would do is I would focus on product market founder fit. And that would be my focus at the very beginning. And so for product, I'd be thinking, okay, I've got to develop the tech first and foremost. So can I find a way to make a proof of concept with no funding? And then secondly is market. And then I would be thinking, okay, I need to talk, network, pitch, attend events, shadow people, feel the problem, get out there and listen. And then finally, it's founders. Really, it's a lonely thing to do on your own. You can do it on your own, but depending on how difficult the technical problem is, deep tech, you really need to have a co-founder. It helps to have a co-founder. So you need to find someone who's obsessed with your mission, who share your values, and who've done what you want to do before, and who are rationally ethical, have integrity, are intelligent, obviously, and you really want to give them at least 20% of the business. And I think if I go back, I would really concentrate on that product, market, founder fit, and making sure that each one of those fits together.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think it's getting that balance, I think, of enough information, as we said, and then not obsessing too much over the small details, which are going to change. And I think, it's having that support network's a really crucial bit of advice, whether that's right at the start or halfway through. And that could be a co-founder, it could be people that are in a similar situation to you, even if it's a completely different sector, like myself and Robert, for example, having someone that you can share, I've just heard this news, there's a government grant that's come out that might be of interest to you, and sometimes just someone to sound off and say, I've had a tough week and how do I get through this, or I've got this issue, is really useful. Because the biggest change for a lot of people I've spoken to with startups is not many people start a startup having worked for a business of 2 or 3 people. Most people have come from a business of 30, 40 plus, had a great idea that isn't doable in their current business, and have gone out on their own. And the first thing you notice on day one is, wow, it's quiet. And those people will be experiencing it, I'm sure, at the moment, working from home. You suddenly miss what they call those water cooler conversations, where just having to have 5 minutes to break your day up, or someone to ask how your weekend was, it's a lonely world on your own at the beginning, at the startup. And I think that support network around you is massively, massively useful. So I think one of the questions we had kind of quite early on was interested in hearing about funding. So I can share in a second kind of the funding element I went through, but from your side, probably most relevant, how did you plan for funding from day one? And then where did you even start looking for funding, I guess would be most people's question.
Day one was all about trying to develop the idea and trying to find a co-founder. That was day one. Funding really came in a bit later, when I realized that the idea had traction. And first off, I tried to go down the Innovate UK route. And the reason I went down the Innovate UK route is it's designed for high risk, early stage startups and businesses where typical private investment, venture capital angels aren't going to invest because it's too high risk and you're too early stage. So I first and foremost looked at Innovate UK. And I was lucky enough to have a good network at the university I was at the time. And I was introduced to someone who had done a lot of Innovate bids, and like an absolute specialist. And he held a seminar for 30 or 20 or 30 of us to just kind of ways to write a bid. Because that's part of the key really for Innovate bids is how to write them. And the seminar was fantastic, and it actually was one of the reasons why we got approved our bid. So yeah, that was our route to funding, but it came after I'd made a proof of concept. So I'd already spent a year developing the technology in a university lab. And I had that proof of concept. I had that video and that data, and that was paramount to the application to Innovate UK to say, this is more than just an idea. This is now a proof of concept. And now we need your money to go to a prototype.
And I think that was very much the case for me. It was having the creating, whether you want to call it a bid, proposal, a business document, etc. I think it's giving people that confidence that your business could be sustainable and could grow. And I think for me, I was always advised you need to be looking at, and this is, I think, generally good advice if you're thinking of starting a business, what is it that you're going to do? Why is it you're going to do it? Because I think that's a real important criteria for investors these days. What's out there currently, even if it's not identical to what you do, who could be the competitors or who could be the companies that you're taking customers from? What do they do? What are their strong bits? That real competitor analysis. And then I think what solution you're going to provide. And then an insight, and as I say, it doesn't need to be real specific detail, but where you see that business in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and what is going to need to happen to get you there. And I think that is a crucial thing that for all businesses, even if you're 4, 5, 6, 10 years old, you should constantly be updating that, because at any time you should be able to say, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what problem we solve, these are the competitors that we have in the market, and this is why we feel that we're stronger. I'm not sure whether you went into detail like that or whether that's something you're looking at, Robert, but I guess you'll have an awareness of your competitors and what else is out there and what stands you guys apart.
Absolutely, that's really good advice. I would recommend reading Start With Why by Simon Sinek.
What a great book that is.
Yeah, and that, though, not just on a business aspect, on a personal level. I firmly believe that to start a business, you need to understand you first. You need to know what your values are, why you do what you do, because the business will become an extension of you. If you start it, it needs to have your passion and your beliefs, and the people who work for you need to share those as well. So I think that's really good advice. Start with why, what, and how, and really know that about you personally before you start the business.
Yeah, definitely. I think I talked on another webinar I covered a couple of days ago about selling. There's a whole, I'm not going to get into it now, but there's a great book by a guy called Dan Pink called To Sell Is to Human. And to summarize it really quickly, he basically said everyone is in sales, whether you're a design engineer, whether you're a company founder, whether you're a delivery driver, everyone sells at some point in their life, whether it's at home to convince their wife to have a takeaway tonight, or whether it's to convince your kids to tidy up their toys. Everyone's always having to sell in some way to convince others to do something they want them to do. And I think that's one of the other big things that I've found since starting a company is it should be the easiest time for you ever to explain what you do and to sell that to people. Because if you're not passionate enough about it, that's your first stumbling block. And I think that's the beauty of having your own startup and directing it the way you want, is you should be so passionate about it when you talk about it, because you should know your why, because that's ultimately why you started it, was to solve an issue. And if you can articulate what that issue is, then it will massively help you as a business. One of the things that I wanted to touch on was from I know we said kind of numbers changing and stuff, from a cash projection, whether that's now or whether that's when you first started. How did you, again, most people have never had to put together a profit and loss forecast or a set of accounts. How did you deal with that, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, biggest bit of advice here. If you've got the product market founder fit set, then the next biggest thing you can do, or the biggest mistake that I would learn from now, is getting your company properly set up from the beginning. So think about shares. If you've got a co-founder, then properly do a founder's contract, an employment contract for you. Set up the company on Companies House with the number of shares that is adequate. Thinking as well in the future of investors. It makes it easier if it kind of will add up to 1 million or something like this, 1 million shares. It makes it easier. They haven't got to go through changes in the future. use an accounting software like Xero or QuickBooks. This is obviously once you've got that product market founder fit set up. The way that I did it at the very beginning was on a shoestring. So, I did the website in HTML on Sublime, and then just uploaded it on a site that I already had, a domain that I already had. I did everything on a shoestring. I did my accounts on Excel or Google Sheets. But once you get past, so that's why I'm saying, once you get past the product market founder fit, and once you're actually getting some traction and things are being developed, the next stage is to really get a proper system, and that's either Xero or QuickBooks. And I would recommend, I use Google Suite. There's obviously others out there, but we use Google Suite. We use Drive for our repository. We use Trello for our project managing. We use Slack for our communication. We use Evernote for our reporting. But I would really recommend Google Suite. Our website's hosted on Google, and our emails Google as well. It's a nice ecosystem. It all integrates really well, and it's all set up extremely quickly.
Yeah, Joe, I think there's a big debate you'll often hear in the startup community is, there's some people that do, and I did very similar to you, let's get that company name, let's get the company set up on company's house, and let's just get it going. I built my first website myself using Weebly, which actually is still good and still does a job. And there's an element of how much time do you waste on your website when actually how much traffic are you driving there in the early days, which is probably not very much. You've got the other side of the coin where people won't launch until everything is in place. And I think it's trying to strike a balance. There's some stuff for me, like the website and bits like that, which you can get back to. And you can raise capital to allow yourself to get others to do that. But I think exactly what Robert said, getting that structure of the company, having the basics of the accountancy and everything set up early days is really crucial and will save you a lot of time at the end. I think one of the other bits of advice I've always been given is when you put together that first cash flow, and however you do it, whether you use Excel, whether you use an online tool, really you just need to look at what money is coming in each month and what expenditure am I going to have each month. It can be fairly simple, but I think two really important things. One, build a gap in. There'll always be costs that you don't expect, or something you want to add on, or a cost that you've forgotten about. And probably similar to you, Robert, I've looked back and think, oh my God, why did I not even budget for the fact that I'd need X, or I didn't even know I'd have to pay for Y. So building some collateral to that. And I think secondly, the other thing that's really crucial is double your costs, half your sales, and if it's still sustainable, that gives you a secure footing to think this business could make money. And I think that's a really important bit, that if you can look at your cash flow forecast over a year, 2 years, 3 years, lose half your sales, double your costs, and the scenario like now that we're going through is a real testament to that, and still be sustainable, you've got a real secure business there. And that isn't possible always from day one, but knowing that it's possible is true.
Yeah,
there's a question. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that you can. There's lots of people who offer services to startups. Accounting services, and develop your pitch deck and develop your investor deck. And me personally, I think you should do it yourself at the beginning, because you need to understand your business. You wouldn't do that long term, but you need to understand your business. If you're going to be CEO or CTO, you need to understand how it works. So when you do give it to somebody else, you can talk through it. You can talk it through with them. You can see if they're doing a good or a bad job. You can see if they're good value for money or bad value for money. You really need to understand your business. And I would say develop your pitch deck, develop your cash flow forecast, do your accounting. Try and do as much as you can at the beginning. So then when you do go to delegate it away, you still have some form of knowledge and control over it and competence over it.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best bit of advice we've had so far, is try and, you can't do everything in the business forever, but I think try and learn as much of it, or certainly the basics, as possible. Because ultimately that is your overriding job, is to run the company, and you need to understand what's going on in the company to do that. I'll jump back to a question we had from Taz about getting traffic to the site. So I'll go first and give you kind of two of my points of view, and then I'll let Robert jump in with his thoughts. So as someone's put in the chat, there are ways you can do it. You can use SEO companies, you can paid advertising, be it on Google or Facebook or LinkedIn, etc. You can promote your content on LinkedIn or Twitter. So there are ways to accelerate that. But secondly, I think the most important way to do it is know who your customer base is and get in front of your customer base. And whether that's posts on LinkedIn, whether it's engaging at community events, networking, whether it's looking at where your customers hang out and how can you attract them, providing something of value, whether it's a webinar like this, a podcast, an email that gives them some value. Ultimately, that's how you're going to drive people to your site. It varies on what you do. If you're selling a clothing product, then absolutely you want to be advertising and driving traffic. But I think ultimately you can pay for lots of things to help you get there. But I think back to Robert's point a second ago about doing it yourself, try and drive that traffic organically, because for me personally, I would rather have one person visit my website who is a potential customer that's engaged with me than pay a company to do it and they say, oh, 100 people have visited your website today, and it's people of no value or relevance to me that have just got there through clicking an advert or a bit of clickbait, etc. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Robert.
Yeah, I probably can't add a great deal to the traffic question because it's not really our business. We're kind of in deep tech and we don't necessarily need to get traffic to our site. It's about developing technology and then demoing that technology. It's business to business. So yeah, probably not. But to add to some of the things you said, there's a lot of different organisations in the UK, not for profit and government backed and private, that are there to help people with some of the tasks that we're not good at, like engineers are not good at. So I found accounting difficult. I found doing the pitch deck difficult. I found kind of getting across what I was trying to do in a simple way so investors could understand straight away, or other people, very difficult. But there's a lot of people out there for free on these not-for-profit organizations, these government organizations that will teach you and help you. So some of those are Business West, if you're in the west of the country, and through Innovate to Succeed. Business Sheffield, if you're in Yorkshire, Launchpad. Then there's the KTN. The KTN got loads of different pitch fest events through Charlotte Thompson. She's fantastic. And then there's the ATI as well. The ATI do some events as well. So there's lots of different organizations throughout the UK that can give you accelerators. Sorry, it's another one, and incubators. It's really key, in my opinion, is to be with other like-minded companies. You sit down at lunch or over a coffee and you chat about the same problems. They know other people. They know, maybe you're looking for a software engineer and they know somebody. They're having a similar problem and they found a solution. And being in a like-minded ecosystem is just spot on. And that's why we moved to the northwest, to Yorkshire, because Manchester's the fastest growing tech city in Europe. We're just located across the Peak District in Sheffield, and it's that being in that ecosystem. And I'd recommend setting up in an ecosystem that's similar to your business.
I think great advice. I would say, to add to that as well, use your network. And there's two elements to that. Is one, going to events, onto your LinkedIn, etc. Reach out to people, because there'll be someone that's gone through it. And if you look at some of the people that have kindly put up kind of their backgrounds and what they do, there's so many people that you're probably connected with or engaged with that have various different backgrounds, that have been through probably challenges you have. So people will help, and I think people will remember, certainly if they've started a business, that they've been there and how tough it was. I'd also say another massive thing, and I'll try not to go on a rant here, but have humility and be honest. I think there's a lot of startups that try and project, as you need to a certain extent, this image of we're hugely successful, we're rapidly growing, making loads of money, and the world's fantastic. But it isn't always the case, and every will have tough times or things they don't know. So be honest with your network, and there's nothing wrong with holding your hands up and saying, God, I'm looking to redesign a website, but I have no idea where to start. Can anyone point me in the right direction or recommend anyone? Take advantage of your support network, because I think a lot of people don't, for fear of looking inexperienced or as if they don't know what they're doing. Just before we come on to Camille's question, just want to take it back slightly, and this will be a little bit more of a general question. But logo, name, what was your thought process behind that? Because I know with some people they find it really difficult and probably spend more time than they should on just what to call it or what color scheme to have.
Yeah. Oh, back to those days. Yeah, I'm not a fan at all. I went for something that made logical sense. I know like a lot of tech startups go for kind of like a snazzy name, but I just wanted a simple name that you know exactly what we did, like from the company name. So Additive Automations, we automate additive manufacturing. It's obvious, and I just took that approach. But I can't really give him too much advice because the color scheme in the logo was a guy that I'd met in a pitch event. A really nice guy, came our mentor, and he's a designer. And he said, "You know what? I'll design your logo for you for free. You know, just we got on really well, and we're still friends, and we still chat." And he just designed the logo for free. So I didn't do that bit. The old one was much worse.
Fair enough. I'll share some experiences from my side. So I think one of the biggest things I found is you can spend ages obsessing over a name and what to call it, and ultimately, I think as long as it is either memorable or describes your business, I'll tell a story here. So my business partner is Lord Sugar, and the first time I showed him the name or told him what the name was going to be, he wasn't the biggest fan, if I'm really honest. And that's not someone you want critiquing you. But ultimately, my thought came back to if, and I've used this line a lot, if you went to someone and said, I'm launching a computer company and I'm going to call it Apple, most people would have thought you were an idiot. And I think ultimately the name is what you make it. And you become known and then become synonymous with that name. And same for the logo and the colors. You don't want it to look stupid. And we use Fiverr for ours. So there's a great website called fiverr.com where you can engage freelancers for a set fee. You agree on a price. People can bid for a piece of work and they'll design your logo. And we had someone out in Asia that put together our logo, sent us all the logo files, all the different colors and renders of it, and we've got that to hand for quite a reasonable fee. So I would say don't overthink it, and use stuff like Fiverr, or as Robert did, people in your network that will help you out just to design it. You can always redo a logo, you can always relaunch it, and ultimately customers are going to be buying, certainly if you're an engineering or tech business, they're going to be buying the product you offer. They're not going to be buying from you because they like your name or your logo looked fancy or your color scheme's really engaging. Ultimately, they buy because you're going to solve a problem for them. So I'd say don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Take Camille's question then. So I'll let you go with this one. For security of data and using cloud-based systems, what did you consider on that front?
Yeah, well, it's a risk anyway. I mean, if you have your own servers on site, that's a risk as well. I'm not sure if I had the same level of security or be able to implement the same level of security. I think we use Google Suite. We also use Evernote and we use Trello. We kind of try to diversify where our data is. And we don't have it just on one platform. We don't have it on too many either. But I am pretty confident that the security of the cloud would be on par with the security that I'd be able to implement with my own servers on site. But as we get bigger, then that might change. Obviously, each stage of growth, we will reevaluate our security. Right now, it's okay. Right now, we're happy with it.
Yeah, and I think use trusted people would be the only advice I can probably share on that. Is go with well-known names, well-known brands that will have that level of security and are used by kind of leading organizations. And as you said, there's only so much you can do, really. There has to be a level of trust that ultimately your data is going to be secure. But I think there's risks whether you've got cloud data, server data. And I think I'm going to come on to Nigel's question. We'll go into detail in a minute. But ultimately, there's a lot of choices when you start up as to what email platform you use, where you host your website, who you partner with, who you talk about accountancy people. How did you look at, what did you use to decide kind of who to partner with? And then we'll come on to kind of Nigel's specifics of his question as well.
It's on a case-by-case basis, because every partner has individual benefits and disadvantages and risks. So there's not a rule. That's very much how we operate. We don't necessarily have one way of working for everybody. We like to be flexible. Flexibility is key to what we do, and being agile. So the example of Renishaw, why do we partner with Renishaw? Well, they were a company that got excited by what we were doing when we showed it to them, and they were really forward thinking, and they could see where the industry was going and what their customers were asking for, or what their pain points were. And they wanted to get involved with the innovation to see if they could reduce some of those pain points. And is there a risk in picking the wrong partner? Well, absolutely, there's a risk. We try not to tie ourselves down to one, in this case, one machine manufacturer, because then that is a risk. You would be relying on one machine manufacturer. But we're partnering on innovation. Doesn't restrict us to partnering with other machine manufacturers in this specific case. And so the relationship was a good one. If we were given a contract that was limiting us to work just with that technology, then that would be a different case, because then it would be much more risky. But that wasn't the contract, that wasn't the relationship. They're really open. Also, it's a British company, and we do want to really bring forward British engineering and British manufacturing. And Renishaw was one of the best examples of that. So it was a good relationship from the beginning. And actually, the first contact with them was the Canadians. It was in the Canadian side, and it was just a meeting with the business development manager, and we got on really well, and that's where it started.
And I think on a more general note on that, I would say it's really tempting when you start off you have lots of people, whoever the supplier is and whatever it's for, that will look at offering you a long-term deal. Naturally, they're trying to tie you down. And again, I would say, and what we've learned is we've changed suppliers, and some we've gone with that we thought was going to really help our business, and ultimately, for no fault of anyone's, not quite worked out. It wasn't quite what we needed. So I would say trial stuff, whether you can get a free trial, whether you sign up and end up paying a bit more for 3 months sign up rather than a 1 year or 2 year sign up. But I think don't overcommit too early, because ultimately, as we talked about throughout this, your business will change and your business will pivot, and what might seem like an essential service today might be redundant tomorrow. And again, it gives you that ability to be a bit more lean and a bit more agile if you can chop and change services as you need them, whether that's a partner for your technology or whether it's a supplier into you as well. Let's touch on the image, and I think you'll have a good bit to share, and I can give a bit of an insight into other companies as well. But there is an image, and I would certainly agree with this, that robotics is something that's only for big corporations, and I want to add into that 3D printing as well, because I think that's been seen massively over the last few weeks, that it did have a perception that unless you're a massive company, you can't really utilize robots, you can't really utilize 3D printing. So taking those two kind of generally, do you agree that there is a bit of an image that only big companies can utilize it? And how do, whether it's yourself or other people thinking of starting something related to that, how do you kind of bring that to the masses?
Yeah, it's not only an image, it's true. It has been for big corporations. It's been too expensive to implement, and the value proposition has needed large production quantities over number of years. And that return on investment typically for an SME just doesn't quite stack up. So it's true, but that's changing, and that's also what we want to change as well. And so what we're doing is we are providing value through the user, and by enabling engineers and designers and creatives that do the job to use a robot and not have to do a 5-year training course or be experts in robotics, for them to be able to use and program the robot to do what they want, then the speed to actually automate, instead of being weeks and months, can be done in hours and days. And instead of needing software and that costs 60, 80, 100K a year, and with robots that cost 60, 70, 80K, can be done with software that costs 10, 15, 20K a year, and robots that cost 5, 10K, 15K. And that then brings the value proposition or the return on investment to within a year. And that is something that is within the realms of an SME to be able to implement, and it doesn't need extremely skilled robotics engineers to be able to program and use. And we're doing that by creating an intuitive user interface and the user experience, and essentially online programming that can be complex programming, but it's simple to do online with very kind of intuitive manual guidance techniques. That's what we're working on. And I think there are other cobot manufacturers like Automata and the German one, Franke Emmiker, that are showing that they're bringing the price down of cobots and they're making them much more accessible to SMEs. And obviously as well, Universal Robots as well, is doing the same thing. So it's changing. I think the next 5-10 years is going to be exciting.
I think there's a massive market for a lot of startups. And if you're an engineer watching this and you're thinking, there's something, I work in a massive corporation and I see a product offering that we have, but it isn't sustainable for SMEs, or you maybe use a product that you think, if this is an SME, they wouldn't have access to this. That could be a great first place for starting a business. And I think you still need to validate that idea. Is there a reason SMEs don't use it? Is it possible to make it cheap enough for their budgets? But some of the best engineering companies I've seen have come out of that, of seeing a big idea in a big corporation and making it possible for the mass market, and being able to do it a lot quicker and a lot more agilely than a big company can do. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to throw it out to any kind of final questions, if anyone's got there, from anything around launching a startup or any other advice people are looking for. Just while I give kind of people a minute or two to type them in, anything from your side, Robert, as just general advice you've been given or you've learned along the way that you would give to anyone launching a startup?
Yeah, I couldn't finish this off. I would disappoint my co-founder if I didn't mention this. I always bang on about this to him and to everybody, all of our team. So I have to mention it. Is the caveat that most startups fail. That's a fact. And we're early stage. We've got no guarantee of succeeding. And likewise, if you start a business. And so the most important thing, and I say this to our team as well, is just to look after yourself and those you love. So exercise, diet, sleep, because that will pay back in how productive you are in your work, and how much you can maintain the determination, the motivation, because it's not easy, and there are sacrifices. And to avoid a meltdown, you do need to make sure that you do look after your diet, you exercise, and you get some good sleep. And that would be my closing remarks.
Yeah, I think definitely, and I think without a doubt, I've compared some of it's like being an athlete. There are people that are naturally gifted in the same way there's people that will launch a startup that just happens to take off. But for most, the best are the ones that dedicate themselves, research, they look after their body, they eat healthy, and I think it's the same for running a business. Ultimately, you want to be putting yourself in the best possible position to make a success of that. And some of the basics are sleep, eat well, live and breathe what you're doing, and take the time for yourself. And I think that we'll come on to Nigel's questions to finish off. How do you de-risk a startup, and how do you bridge the gap from, I guess, being salary before you get funding. I think just to touch on that before I kind of let you answer it, I think it is hard to de-risk a startup, and I think it comes to that back to that point of overestimate your budget. Imagine your costs are going to be a lot more, imagine your sales are going to be a lot less, and make sure it's still sustainable. It gives you a bit of a safety net. And I think in terms of bridging that gap, ultimately for most startups, it is a case of not taking a salary or not taking much of a salary until you do get that funding or those first sales. And I think that's another thing we haven't touched on, but look at that. How would that impact you? How much of a drop could you take? How would that impact your family and your day-to-day life? And I think people are probably getting an insight into it in the current situation of being at home, maybe taking less of a salary, or maybe not having salary coming in even. And if this is, you're looking at it and seeing this as a uncomfortable but enjoyable environment to be in, then the startup life is probably for you. How have you de-risked, and have you found kind of going from the security of employment to living each day with with the pressures of running a business?
Yeah, you can't de-risk a startup. So I would go back to what I just said, which is to look after the people you love. Because so my wife was, we both sat down and talked about doing this before I resigned from my previous job, and we both realized the benefits, the potential unlimited upside of doing this. So we were both invested in it. We both felt it was the right decision. It wasn't her sacrificing for me, which I wouldn't have done if it was for that reason. So I had her support. That was one big factor, and made sure that I didn't forget that, and that we kept having time for each other. And then the other point is put our costs to an absolute minimum. So some of the loan that I got for the university degree, because I had to commute. Well, I didn't commute. It was a few hours away. So I had to live at campus during the course. So to reduce the cost and to keep back some of that loan, I slept in my van. And when I was there, and so I was able to kind of keep some of that loan and use that to live off. So you just have to find a way in the first 6 months to a year. You have to act like you're poor. You're not actually poor, because that's the other point. The downsides actually aren't that great in Britain, in a first world country. Luckily, we live here. The actual downsides aren't that great. There's a great benefit system. There's always going to be healthcare. You're always going to be able to find food on the table or shelter. It's not like we're living in, unfortunately, other places in the world where those safety nets aren't there. Those safety nets are there. So if things did go terribly, the downside's not the end of the world. Like, that's why if you've got your health and you've got your mental health and your physical health, that's the most important thing. But you can't de-risk it. There is that risk.
Yeah, I think definitely, and I think it's worth remembering. Again, it comes back to that thing of the honesty and the humility of things don't happen overnight. And I think there's not many startups, if any, out there that have just plain sailing, made loads of money early days, and all lived a very comfortable life. And I think people look at the likes of Facebook, for example, and think, wow, massive business, and it took off overnight, etc. But it really didn't. It took them a good kind of a year or so, and before they were in a very kind of tight community of network of investors. It really was a year as a business before they even took off and started to get investment and funding. So it isn't going to happen overnight, and it comes back to that point from yesterday. You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're going to have that for at least a year, or if not longer. I appreciate everyone's questions. It's great to have so many people join us, and hopefully anyone that is watching this back, we've covered kind of the questions you would have wanted to know. We're finishing off kind of every episode with a one-line takeaway. So Robert, I'd like your kind of one-line takeaway of advice for launching a startup and surviving those first 6 months.
Oh, you put me on the spot big
I
time.
know. I like doing that.
I know. Well, I'm going to have to use my motto then, which is what I've got tattooed on my arm, which is Carpe Diem, which is Latin for seize the day, seize the moment.
And I like that. I know we spoke about that before, but I think it couldn't be more true for startup. And I think the overall advice I've taken away from the experience of a startup and speaking to you and knowing you is just every day is going to be different. And you know what, go and embrace it, learn from it. Except that I'm going to give Phil, your co-founder, a shout out here. He gave a great comment on the podcast that we did, which was fail and you know, be accept failing, because each day there's going to be small successes and small failures, and as long as you're learning from those little failures and adapting and pivoting your business because of them, you'll ultimately be a success. As for everyone, thanks for joining. There'll be another episode tomorrow to conclude the week off, and I'm going to put a link in the chat as to where you can register for all of them and watch back any past episodes. And then next week we've got another packed schedule as well, which is covering everything from how you manage an engineering team remotely, how we get more female and minority engineers into the industry, and through to a hopefully a conclusion, all being well, of a transatlantic discussion on 3D printing. So keep an eye on the website link I've put for the other sessions. And thanks again for joining us, and thanks, Robert, for your time.
Thanks, Tom. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. It's great to have someone so passionate about engineering and manufacturing in the UK.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.